So here we are on the runway ready for takeoff. So just going to go through a few things before we do start the takeoff. What we want to make sure is that our parking brake is set to off. Our flaps are set to 1. We can check the flap indicator just here. We're on set 1. And our thrust levers are on idle. At this point, we're going to begin our takeoff. So what will happen is we'll bring the throttles up to about 50% N1. So if you look at your engine display, we're going to bring our throttles up to about the 5 mark. Once they've sort of leveled out, you'll sort of hear them speed up and then level out. We're then going to take them up to 100. At that point, we're then going to start rolling down the runway. On our speed is going to slowly increase. We're also going to see a 1 indicator, that's a V1. So up to that point we can abort the takeoff. Once we've got to V1 we need to commit to it. Once V1 has passed our current speed, or we've gone over the V1 mark, we'll then call out rotate, and at that point is where we're going to pitch the nose up to about 5 or 10 degrees nose up, and as soon as we've taken off we're then going to go up to about 10 or 15 degrees nose up, ready for the initial climb. Once we've started our climb, in the top left corner it will start to flash level climb or something like that. At that point we're then going to take the throttle from 100% or toga down to this CL, I'll zoom in, this CL option here, and that's our auto thrust, and we're going to make sure that this button here is lit, and then from that is going to manage our thrust for the remainder of the flight. So we're ready for takeoff. So let's go for it. So we're going to bring up to 50%, and then up to 100 we're on toga. So as you can see, our airspeed is now live. We're at 60 knots, 80. There's our 1 mark. So at this point we'll call out V1 and then rotate. We'll pitch the nose about 5 or 10 degrees nose up. We've got our positive rate of climb, so we retract the landing gear. So the wheels come up into the fuselage of the aircraft, and then we carry on our initial climb up to our, I think it was 10,000 feet. And then in a minute, there we go, level climb. So we're going to bring our throttle back to the CL position, ensure that our auto thrust is enabled, and we're just going to carry on with our initial climb up to 10,000 feet. As you get closer to your initial altitude, air traffic control will come on and say something like climb and maintain 20,000 feet, 15,000 feet or whatever. All we do is we acknowledge the request and then just change the altitude up to whatever we were told. You may hear the term flight level 200, flight level 350. That's just another way of saying 25,000 feet, 30,000 feet. So if it's flight level 300, that's 30,000 feet. Flight level 350 is 35,000 feet. And 350 is 35,500 feet. So it'll only ever go up in increments of 500. So we'll just carry on up. One thing I forgot to mention After we've rotated and started our initial climb, you would have seen an S on the indicator. As and when our airspeed goes past that S, we can then retract the first set of flaps, so we're now fully retracted. And something else to point out is after that initial climb, I normally push the nose to about 10 degrees nose up, just to keep the airspeed, because as the higher you go, you'll notice that your airspeed starts to drop, so you need to push the front of the aircraft down a bit just to keep the airspeed up. So let's carry on. Let's keep climbing. So in a few minutes, our air traffic control tells us to descend and maintain, I think it's 18,000 feet. Once you get that command, we're going to do several things. The first thing, we're going to acknowledge the request, as always. Always acknowledge it first. We're then going to take the throttle back to idle. And then we're going to push the nose of the aircraft to the horizon. You don't need to go under the horizon, but we're just going to push the nose of the aircraft down to the horizon. And what that's going to do is slowly decrease our altitude, while also maintaining a good airspeed. So at this point, they've told us to descend, so we've cut the throttle to 0. We're just pushing the nose of the aircraft to the horizon mark, and as you can see, our airspeed is our altitude is starting to drop, and our airspeed is currently about 215 knots. And as you descend at this rate, your airspeed normally stays the same or increases slightly just as you're going down. Just carry on for a bit. So you can see we're now at 240 knots and we're still descending, but we're descending at a nice sort of steady rate. Soon we're going to be hitting our desired altitude. So what we're going to do is we're going to pitch the nose craft about 5 degrees nose up, and that's going to slow the descent, and then that's going to allow us to control the final few thousand feet to get to our altitude, just so we don't go past it. What you'll also notice is as we pitch nose up, our altitude will slowly start to slow down, but it will still descend. But what you'll also notice is our airspeed will start to slow down as we're sort of pointing the aircraft up, but we haven't got any thrust. And that's exactly what we're going to want. So as we see, we're just pushing it up, so our descent is now stopped. It's now rising because we're going 230 knots, but as you can see, our airspeed is now starting to reduce, and our altitude is going to start descending as well, even though we're still pointing above the horizon. But that's exactly what we want. We want to reduce our airspeed to around 200 to 220 knots, and our altitude is now slowly coming down. So I think it was 18,000 feet, it was our desired altitude. At this point, we're going to put the throttles back on auto thrust, so again we're going to put them to that CL position, but we're going to level the aircraft so we stay at 18,000 feet, and then literally I think in a few seconds they're going to call us to descend and maintain. There we are. So again, we've cut the throttles. We're going to pitch the nose craft to the horizon. We're going to start our descent, I think it was to 16,000 feet. But again, our airspeed will start to slow down. Our altitude starts to come down, but it's always a steady drop. So we're not dropping like thousands of feet very, very quick. So we drop it down to 16, and again when we get, pretty sure it was 16, we're going to go nose up. And I think at that point they actually told us to descend and maintain 4,000 feet. So again we acknowledge, drop it down to 4,000, make sure we're on idle, keep the nose of the plane on the horizon, and we just carry on our descent. You can't see here, but there is a sort of a green line that you do follow. So that just sort of keeps you on track. So we're just going to carry on our descent down to 4,000 feet. As we approach 4,000 feet, we're going to do the same thing as what we've done before, except what we're also going to do is we need to get the aircraft in a configuration that it's going to be able to maintain 4,000 feet while also keeping a slow speed. Because we're now going to get to a point where we're going to start to slow the aircraft down, ready for takeoff, landing. So how we do that is we're going to do the exact same. We're going to acknowledge the request. We're going to pull the nose of the aircraft about 5 degrees nose up to slow the descent. That's going to directly reduce our airspeed. And then once we get to the 4,000, we're going to put the throttle back to auto thrust, so that CL, make sure auto thrust is enabled, and then it's just maintaining the 4,000 feet. Now what we don't want to do, because we're going at a slower speed, we're going to need to pitch the nose about 10 or 15 degrees. But we don't want to do that. So what we're also going to do is we're going to set the flaps to level 2. And what that's going to do is that's going to help generate lift going at a slower speed. So I'll show you that in a minute. So as we're approaching 4,500, so like I said, we want to get down to about 200 knots in order to deploy two sets of flaps. So we're just pitching up slightly to slow that descent. So we're at 5 degrees. You can see that descent has now slowed. Our airspeed is now 210. We still want to get down to this 4,000, so it's just a case of balancing the two. Once we get to 200, we can start deploying. So we've got first set of flaps, and we've got our second set of flaps. Notice how our indicator is showing that we're now increasing our altitude, even though we're only going 180. Eventually that balances out. So that's our auto thrust. So we've put it back to CL. We can now pitch the aircraft a little bit lower to the horizon now, as we control our descent down to 4,000. Once at 4,000, we can just pitch up slightly, and then what we're doing is we're controlling this little green line here. Now, I don't know exactly what it stands for, but this just helps you tell you if you're staying, increasing, or lowering. So at the moment, if we carry on, we're going to be increasing our altitude. So once we're at around 4,000 feet, we want to keep this green line with that yellow line as much as possible. And that's going to help us stay at whatever altitude we're at. So it is a bit of a balancing act, I'll give it that. But we're at 4,000. We've got auto thrust enabled, so we're now just going to carry on until we get to our final descent. Now in a minute there is a bit of a wobble. I don't know why the plane just suddenly veered off to the right. That is not part of the flight tutorial. That was just a few times my flights have done that now. Just about here, you can ignore this wobble in a minute. That bit there, ignore that. So at this point, we've got Bristol Airport to our right, just behind that column. Now this is the tricky bit. This is where we need to start lining up to the runway, ready for our landing. At this point we will enable approach mode and ILS mode, and what that will do is, again not on the recorder, there is a pink square that will come up about here, and that's our glide slope. Now we want that pink square to be as close to our horizon as possible, and what that does is that helps us lower the aircraft at a nice 3-degree angle, ready for landing. So I'm really sorry you can't see that on this recording, but there is a square that I'm trying to line up with. We put the landing gear down, so that's the wheels of the aircraft coming down, ready for touchdown. And it's just lining up, so you've got the centre of the runway lining up to where the screw is, so I'm a little bit far over. It takes a lot of practice to get this lined up just by visual. At bigger airports, the ILS has a marker across here as well, and that helps you line up to the centre of the runway, but Bristol Airport don't seem to have that. As we begin our descent, I'll just go through what happens at landing. So as we get closer, you'll see 4 sets of lights to the left hand side of the runway. Those are PAPI lights, P-A-P-I. And what they'll do is they act as our indicator for the glide slope as well. So if you haven't got the ILS on your aircraft, you can use the lights, so you can just see them there. So if we can zoom in. So those 4 lights there. So 4 white indicate we're too high. 3 white, 1 red is slightly too high. 2 red, 2 white, so that's 3 white, 1 red, so we're slightly too high.
1,000.
2 white, 2 red, we are on the glide slope, and that's what we want to try and keep. If it's 3 red, 1 white, we're slightly too low. 4 red, we're way too low. As we come in, the announcer will call out 50, 40, 30, 20. At that point, he's going to call out retard.
500.
At that point, we're going to pull the throttles back to idle, and we're going to pull the nose of the aircraft
300.
up slightly, and then glide it down, hopefully to a
200.
touchdown.
100. 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. Retard.
So throttle back, nose up a bit, and there's our touchdown. Gently bring the front of the aircraft down, and at this point we're going to initiate our reverse thrust and our speed brake, which is this one here, and that's the landing.